I absolutely hate HP bars, mana bars, and stamina bars in lit RPGs and in isekais. In a lot of cases, like the HP bar and the stamina bar, they become completely redundant because characters already physically look like they're dying usually when the HP bar gets low enough. Or in the case of stamina, people just start panting heavily because they're out of stamina or low on stamina in some cases. And to me, a lot of cases, mana bars just kind of feel like very vague things that are there but aren't really taken all that seriously. In a lot of books, especially isekais, mana bars are essentially just used as a way to justify the character being able to blast a bunch of attacks and give you a vague number of how many times they can shoot certain things without actually committing to how many numbers they're actually being able to fire. So the audience has no idea how long it would take, most times, for a character to run out of mana. I've recently been reading a lot of lit RPGs, like Primal Hunter, and I'm doing another reread of Dungeon Lord, which, by the way, go look up Dungeon Lord, it's actually really good. And I'm going to be using these two stories, and Grimgar also, as a way to talk about this. Also, for the record, this is not going to be a very serious video. I am just kind of venting about the dumb, like, nitpicky things I find in Isekai and lit RPGs. And while yes, I'm going to be bashing Primal Hunter a little bit in this video, it's nowhere near the worst lit RPG I've ever heard. It's honestly slightly above mid. It's like maybe a 6 in terms of quality. Most of them are below average, if I'm being entirely honest. Also, keep in mind that these small criticisms are essentially mostly focused on book series specifically. That doesn't mean that these criticisms cannot be used for certain anime scenes or certain moments. For example, yes, we really need that tiny little HP bar in the bottom of my total. Now she's dying. No shit. It is just easier for the animators to show how much HP they have left and make it faster and then go back to fighting. But in books, you have to actually stop the plot for a second to check the resources of the character before continuing the fight. Instead of just giving the audience more immersive information, like how the character's feeling, the legs are shaking, blood dripping in their body, just more things that help immerse the audience into your book. Let's get HP bars out of the way first. They are either redundant or, in the case of Primal Hunter, they're kind of used as a way to get the character out of problems that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be getting out of. They're redundant because a lot of the times when characters are taking massive damage, you just, as the audience member, are getting a description of what's happening in the book. You do not need to be told how much HP the character has left to know that they are in a lot of trouble if they are panicking and are in severe pain. It doesn't take much thinking to know that they're low on HP, so the characters checking their HP bars while they're slowly dying is just kind of made redundant. And two, characters like in Primal Hunter, like Jake, who puts a lot of points into their vitality, survive bullshit like getting their arm cut off, getting shot by arrows, stabbed through the chest by a flaming spear, smacked around by a bunch of different magic spells. And because the character can take just so much damage, there is absolutely no tension. Having high vitality in Primal Hunter gives him the ability to regenerate his missing limbs. Something, by the way, that other characters do not have, at least by this point in the story. They have to do kind of a workaround by evolving their class, but that's an entirely different conversation. So putting your health into a quantifiable stat that can be raised up severely just kind of feels cheap, essentially, because you can be borderline immortal. And to me, that's just not interesting, because I know no matter how much damage you take, no matter if you get crippled, you're just gonna heal it off. Also, for the record, the main character of Primal Hunter is basically Kirito with more personality. Yes, they have social anxiety just like Kirito. Yes, Jake also has a severely high speed stat just like Kirito. And yes, Jake also has a very high healing stat just like Kirito. And yes, he also likes to be alone just like Kirito. Dude, it's... I don't want to talk about it anymore. Moving on. In stuff like Grimgar and in Dungeon Lord, they don't have HP bars. Instead, what the writer does is make the character still mortal. In something like Dungeon Lord, they actually follow something similar to the D&D stat system. They rename everything. In Dungeon Lord, there's something called the Endurance stat, which in D&D it's like Constitution. The Endurance stat gives you basically much higher levels of stamina and makes it so you can take more damage. Now, this Endurance stat is very useful for you to take a lot of heavy damage. However, let's say you get your stomach ripped open and you have a very high endurance stat. That endurance stat will make it so you don't die right away, but if you do not get any medical help, you're going to slowly die. And due to the fact that the trauma and pain from getting your stomach ripped open is a serious problem, your body is going to go into shock and you won't be able to move. But since you have a high endurance stat, you're not gonna die. which leads to a slow and painful death. So an endurance stat, while it's useful, can also be a hindrance and can be used to torture somebody. Also, and this has been proven in Dungeon Lord a couple times, a clean stab to the heart or brain will kill anyone, regardless of your level if you are a human, and regardless of your stats. So whenever Ed, the main character, takes damage, we know that it's serious damage. We don't need to guess something about an HP bar or how much HP he can take. No, he just explains how hard it is for him to move now that his leg's been cut. In stuff like Grimgar, you're basically just humans. Like, sometimes you can be a pretty tough human, like in the case of characters like Kuzaku, who basically have survived things like getting kicked by a giant, and he was not okay. He needed to be healed immediately after that. And getting shot by like 10 crossbow bolts. And his friends had to work together to pull them out at the same time and have Mary heal him immediately. Even then, his blood didn't come back. He kind of just was a little woozy afterwards. Basically, anything big in Grimgar that hits you is probably going to either cripple you or put you down very quickly. But adds more tension because the characters could actually die and it could actually be slowed down by small things. So adding stuff like HP that can be increased, thus making it a lot easier to ignore damage, makes it a lot less interesting for a lot of the cases. And everything that you can say about the HP bar can also be said about the stamina bar. In most stories, you're better off just completely removing the HP bar and the stamina bar and just replace it with describing what the characters are feeling and how their bodies look. It adds more tension, makes it more immersive for the reader, and adds less numbers. Fuck numbers. And finally, the mana bar. The mana bar, I feel like it's gonna be the most contentious part of my video. If you have a vague notion of how much magic you have, it makes it a lot easier for you to kind of like Deus Ex Machina your characters out of situations. What? I'm not out of magic. I have a little more. Now we can teleport away. Whee! Because you never actually establish just how much magic a character has. You're just telling them that you have a certain big number and keep it vague with how much the magic costs. This is unanimous pretty much across most light RPGs and a lot of isekais. Instead of a mana bar, I prefer what Dungeon Lord does. They use what's called daily spells, or in D&D terms, spell slots. Once you unlock low-level magic casting, you're given anywhere between 2 to 3 daily spell slots. As you level up your basic spell crafting, for every level, you gain 1 new spell slot. At maximum, you can get anywhere between 10 to 12 basic spell slots, and then eventually, you can get what's called improved spell slots, and then eventually advanced spell slots, and heroic spell slots, and legendary spell slots, and so on and so forth. What makes this system a lot better is that we always know how many spells a character has, or at least it's alluded to through the story. Ed at the beginning of Dungeon Lord has only 3 spell slots. Eventually, at maximum, he gets about 12 spell slots of basic level and 2 to 3 improved spell slots. That's by book 4. And the funny things about Ed having spell slots is that there is no spell slot UI to essentially tell him how many spell slots he has left. He and the audience both have to keep track of the spell slots. In the 4th book, he does actually forget to keep track of his basic spell slots, and he got very lucky that he had 1 spell slot left. But if you, as the audience member, were keeping track and counting, you would know he had 1 more spell slot. So whenever Ed starts running out of spells, we, just like Ed, start panicking because we know that he's running out of options, which increases the immersion of the story, because we have just about as much information of the system as Ed does. You don't have to throw a bunch of numbers at the audience to kind of try justifying how strong the characters are, because we know how strong Ed is at most times in the story. And we don't need to stop the plot to check our resources like HP, stamina, and mana. Instead, what happens is the writer treats the audience like adults, and you are expected to remember what just happened and how many spell slots he actually has. So things ultimately end up making sense whenever he's out of spells. For me personally, as an audience member of a story, I feel a lot more gratified to know what's going on with the character's powers and the mechanics of the story just as well as the main character does. I don't need to do guessing games and know how many attacks it's gonna take to kill a character. It's not super vague, and it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina whenever something happens to Ed or other characters in the story. But those are my opinions on HP bars, stamina bars, and mana bars, and why I think they're stupid in most cases. Again, this video is not supposed to be taken really all that seriously. This is a very small thing that just like irks me whenever I read books. Thank you to my subs over on Twitch. And if you guys want to get a shout out at the end of the video, either subscribe to our Twitch or use the thanks feature here on YouTube to send us a donation, and I'll put your name at the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.